stairs. Chapter 17. When I was a child, my stepmothers would usher their children into bed to tell them stories, but always behind closed and bolted doors. I was never invited in to listen, so I lurked around in the corridor, moving from doors to windows as I tried to determine which woman's voice was loudest each night. I consoled myself by saying that being motherless meant that I got to pick and choose my stories. If I did not like the story one wife was telling her children, I could simply move to the next doorway. I was not trapped behind the bolted doors like my half-siblings. I told myself that I was free. Sometimes I did not check the floor very well before sitting down, and I would sit in chicken or goat shit. Some of the women were just dirty. They did not bother to clean up their part of the corridor before settling in for the night. I loved the riddles best because I knew them so well. The thin rod that touches both heaven and earth. Rain. The one who eats with the king but does not pick up the plate. The housefly. I mouthed the answers from my spot in the corridor, usually before a half-sibling screamed it inside the room. And when the other children were asked to clap for the one who had got the answer right, I would smile, and my face would feel warm, as if they were actually clapping for me. I would sing along to the choruses that came in the middle of the tale, but always under my breath. If my voice was heard on the other side, if one of the mothers came out to check, I would have been in hot soup. My ear would have been twisted and pulled until it was hot enough to boil water on. In our polygamous home, eavesdropping was not just rude, it was criminal. Everyone had secrets that they were ready to guard with their lives. I learned to be light-footed, to listen for the footfalls of anyone coming to the door during the tale. I learned to listen and run to my room without making noise. My favorite story was the one about Olurumbi and the Iroko tree. Initially, it was difficult for me to believe the version my stepmothers told. Their Olurumbi was a market woman who promised to give her daughter to the Iroko tree if it could help her to sell more goods than other traders in the market. At the end of the story, she lost her child to the Iroko. I hated this version because I did not believe that anyone would trade a child for anything else. The story, as my stepmothers told it, did not make sense to me. So I decided to create my own version. I added new bits and pieces each time one of my stepmothers told the tale. After a while, I would tune out whenever they told Olurumbi's story and concentrate on building my own version of it. That was the version I told my Olamide. I started telling her stories after Momi left. She would have thought it was strange that I was telling stories to an infant who could not comprehend what I was saying, but I had been waiting all my life for a child, my own child, a child I could tell stories to. I was not ready to wait one more minute. I told the stories in the afternoon, when Olamide and I were alone in the house. I made up new stories in addition to those I remembered from my childhood, but I told my version of Olurumbi's story most often, and I think Olamide liked it as much as I did. In my version, Olurumbi was born a very long time ago, at a time when human beings still understood the language of trees and animals. Olurumbi's family loved her, and she was everyone's favorite. She was like water. She had no enemies in her family. Olurumbi's mother loved her so much that she took Olurumbi along to the market every day. This was how Olurumbi learned to trade very well, so that even as a young girl, she knew how to manage a stall. Olurumbi was an obedient child, very beautiful. She never told a lie, never stole. She never snuck out at night to talk to boys behind a wall. Olurumbi was living happily, until one fateful day. On that day, Olurumbi's father was harvesting a lot of yams on his farm. This farm was next to a forest. He asked Olurumbi's mother and all the children to follow him to the farm to help out. But Olurumbi was asked to stay behind to manage the stall. When she got back from the market in the evening, she prepared a big meal for the people who had gone to the farm. Then she waited and waited for them to get back. The sun disappeared from the sky, and they didn't return from the farm. When the sun came up the next morning, Olorombi went to the market. She assumed that her family had decided to sleep at the farm the previous night. But when she got back from the market, there was still no one in the house. There was some light in the sky, so she hurried into the forest and went to her father's farm. There was nobody there. She walked the length and breadth of the farm, calling out the names of each member of her family. There was no response. By the time Olorombi got back to the village, it was dark. She went home, and when she discovered there was no one there, she began going from house to house, asking if anyone had seen her family. While the sun slept that night, Olorombi went to every house in the village to ask if anyone had seen her family members. No one knew where they were. The moment the sun woke up and started its work in the skies, Olorombi went to the king's palace to report the strange occurrence. The king sent out a search party into the forest to look for the missing people. Olorombi didn't leave the king's palace until the search party returned 2 days later. The search had been fruitless. "Maybe your family decided to leave this our village," the king said to Olorombi. Olorombi pleaded with the king to send the bravest hunters in the village into the depths of the forest. The king agreed, but after 5 days, the hunters returned empty-handed. They too had been unable to find Olorombi's family. The king advised Olorombi to get on with her life because there was nothing left to be done. "Maybe your family decided to leave the village," he said again. Olorombi did not believe the king. She knew that her family would never abandon her, so she decided to search for them again in the forest. Every day of the week she went deep into the forest, asking all the trees if they had seen her family. But the trees refused to tell her anything. Then one day she asked the king of trees, the Iroko tree. "I know where your family is," the Iroko said. "Are they alive? Tell me, are they still alive?" Olorombi asked. "Yes, they are still alive," the Iroko said. "But I don't know how long they will last." Olorombi screamed, "Iroko, tell me where they are so I can rescue them quickly." "No," the Iroko said. "Please, Iroko, tell me where they are. I will do anything. Anything you ask me to do, I will do." "No way," said the Iroko. "Please, Iroko, I will give you anything you want, anything you ask. Just tell me where they are." "Anything I want?" the Iroko asked. "Anything." Olorombi was on her knees before the Iroko tree. "I want your first child," the Iroko said. "Iroko, but I don't have a child," Olorombi said. "Ask me for anything else, and I will give it to you. Do you want a cow?" "No," the Iroko said. "I want your first child." "Do you want a goat? I can get a very big goat." "No," the Iroko said. "I want your first child." "But I don't have a child to give you," Olorombi said. "I am not even married." "You can fulfill your vow when you have a child," the Iroko said. Olorombi did not say anything for a long time. She was on her knees before the Iroko, thinking about her family, her father, her mother, her brothers, her sisters, all gone. "All right," Olorombi said. "I will give you my first child." "You must swear," the Iroko said. "I swear that I will give you my first child." "You must go and swear before the king of your village," the Iroko said. "When you come back, I will tell you where they are." Olorombi ran into the village and swore before the king that she would give the Iroko her first child if the Iroko revealed where her missing family was. When Olorombi got back to the forest, her family members were all standing beside the Iroko tree. She was so happy. She hugged all of them. "Where have you all been?" Olorombi asked. "What happened?" "We can't remember," they said. "How did you find them?" Olorombi asked the Iroko. That is a secret of the forest, the Iroko said. I can never tell you. Thank you, Olurombi said. Don't forget your vow, Iroko said. I will never forget it, Olurombi promised. Olurombi went back into the village with her family. Whenever she remembered her promise to the Iroko, she became very afraid. She stopped going into the forest to gather firewood for her cooking. She stopped going to the forest to gather herbs to sell. Many years passed, and Olurombi never saw the Iroko. However, any time someone from Olurombi's village went into the forest, the Iroko would ask about Olurombi. How is Olurombi doing? The Iroko would ask. She is going to her husband's house tomorrow. In fact, these twigs that I am gathering will be used to cook at the wedding. How is Olurombi? The Iroko would ask. Is she enjoying her husband's house? Olurombi is too lucky. She married the best man in the world. She is even pregnant already. She is very happy. I only wish I were as lucky as Olurombi. Why did I have to marry a foolish man like my husband? How is Olurombi? The Iroko would ask. Have you noted? She just had a baby girl. They named the child Akponbiekpo. How is Akponbiekpo? The Iroko would ask. She is the most beautiful child in the village. Her skin is so fair, so spotless. I have never seen anything like it. You don't need to ask if she is Olurombi's daughter. She is exactly like her mother from head to toe. If only my own daughter were that beautiful, what kind of luck do I have? As Akponbiekpo grew older, she was warned never to go into the forest. Every morning, Olurombi warned her child never to go near the forest. But one day, while Akponbiekpo was playing with her friends, they decided to go into the forest. Come with us, they told Akponbiekpo. My mother says I must never go into that forest, Akponbiekpo said. But there are beautiful trees there, with sweet fruit. My mother says I mustn't go there. Why? They asked. I don't know. The other children laughed. So you have never been in the forest? No. Never in your life? No, Akponbiekpo said. The other children laughed and laughed and laughed. So you have never seen the forest? No. You have never seen the deer? No. You have never seen the very tall Iroko, that is the king of all trees? No. Then you have not seen anything. You don't know anything. You have not seen anything in your life, they said. Goodbye, the other children said. We are leaving for the forest. We are going to find some twigs and eat sweet fruits. We are going to say hello to the Iroko, the king of trees. I'll go, Akponbiekpo said. Let me go with you. I want to see the king of trees. The children went to the forest, and that was the last time anyone ever saw Akponbiekpo. The other children came back to the village with the twigs. They did not even notice Akponbiekpo was not with them until Olurombi came out and asked, Where is my daughter? They searched every inch of the village for Akponbiekpo, but nobody could find her. The only place left to search was the forest. When Olurombi got to the forest, the Iroko refused to say a word to her. Olurombi pleaded and pleaded, but the Iroko would not speak. Olurombi never saw her child again, and the trees stopped talking to human beings after that. The reasons why we do the things we do will not always be the ones that others will remember. Sometimes I think we have children because we want to leave behind someone who can explain who we were to the world when we are gone. If there really was once an Olurombi, I do not think she had any children after she lost Akponbiekpo. I think the version of her story that survived her would have been kinder to her if she'd left behind someone who could shape the way she would be remembered. I told Olamide several stories. expecting that one day she, too, would tell the world my story. Chapter 18. A mother must be vigilant. She must be able and willing to wake up 10 times during the night to feed her baby. After her intermittent vigil, she must see everything clearly the next morning so that she can notice any changes in her baby. A mother is not permitted to have blurry vision. She must notice if her baby's wail is too loud or too low. She must know if the child's temperature has risen or fallen. A mother must not miss any signs. I'm still sure that I missed important signs. I had decided as soon as she was born that I would breastfeed Olamide for at least 1 year. I still had a long way to go on the morning that I missed the important signs. She was just 5 months old. I was feeling sleepy that morning because I'd had to wake up several times during the night to feed her. At dawn, I showered, gave Olamide her bath, rocked her to sleep, and laid her in the cot. Then I climbed into bed to get a few hours of sleep, fully expecting her to wake me up with her wails within a few hours. I woke up around noon, and was relieved that Olamide was still napping in her cot. I went downstairs to get some food, and must have spent about 30 minutes in the kitchen. After I finished eating, I went back upstairs, expecting to find my daughter awake. She did not always cry when she woke up. Sometimes she would stay in the cot gurgling and amusing herself. When I leaned over her cot, Olamide seemed unusually still. It took me about a minute to realize that she was not breathing. I picked her up and screamed her name. I shook her and tried to check her heartbeat. I ran downstairs with my baby in my arms, still screaming. I rushed about the sitting room trying to find my car keys. I probably spent a few minutes searching for the keys, but it felt like a year. When I'd checked every surface and kicked the cushions out of the chair, I stood in the middle of the room for a brief moment holding my limp baby close to my breasts. I remember picking up the phone and calling Akin's office. I know that I spoke with him, but I do not remember what I said. I remember dropping the phone and leaving the house, running out of the estate into the street, where I flagged down the taxi that took me to the hospital. Chapter 19. Yejide was sitting in the corridor when I arrived, not on one of the benches, but right on the cemented floor. I could see her as soon as I left the hospital parking lot. Wasn't sure she was the one at first because there were no shoes on her feet. Should have known when I saw the bare feet that something had gone very wrong. I crouched when I got to her side, put my arm around her shoulder, even waved a greeting at a nurse that I recognized. "Get up," I said. "I'm sure she'll be okay. Has the doctor said anything?" I assumed that Olamide had been admitted, figured they might have found out what had caused whatever was wrong, and had given Yejide an update before I arrived. "Do I need to pay for anything? Yejide, please, get up. No need to sit on the floor. Relax. She'll be fine. You know they say children are resilient. Oh yeah, stand up." She stared up at me, eyes wide and mouth open. "Yejide." She blinked and swallowed. I shook her a bit because I could tell that she was not fully present with me. Her hair was in disarray, so I placed my hand on her head, pushed her tresses backwards. "What did they say happened? Have you spoken to any of her doctors?" "They have taken Olamide to the mortuary." My hand fell off her shoulder, and I fell to my knees beside her. "What do you mean by mortuary?" I said. "I'm sorry," Yejide said, holding her head in her hands as though its weight had all of a sudden become too heavy for her slim neck to bear. "I'm so sorry. I didn't take long. I was hungry. I just wanted to make something to eat. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." "No," I said, sure that I wasn't processing what she'd said quite right. It didn't make any sense for her to mention Olamide and mortuary in the same breath. Wait. Calm down, please. Olamide, Where is Olamide? She ran her hands through her hair, slapped her head, then spread her arms. They have taken her to the mortuary Akin. They say she is dead. They say my daughter is dead. They say Olamide is dead. They say... I stood up, rubbed my eyes with the back of my hand because I felt as though everything I was seeing was tilted. I walked down the corridor away from her, stopped when I could no longer hear her voice, then turned back to look at her. She kept slapping her head, but there were no tears. She did not scream, just kept hitting herself, her breasts, her thigh, her face. Don't know how long I stood at the end of the corridor just watching her, trying somehow to absorb the fact that after everything Yejide and I had done to have a child we had without warning lost, Olamide. Didn't think it was possible for the world to change so suddenly. I was aware of other people moving up and down the corridor. I heard heels clicking, people speaking, felt some bodies push past mine. But I felt so alone, as though within the space of time it had taken Yejide to say, "They have taken Olamide to the mortuary." I had been transported to a planet with no human life. Eventually, I went back to Yejide, held her hands as she stood up, led her to the car, and helped her into the passenger's side. Still don't know where I got the strength to walk into the emergency ward. Only know that I found myself in front of the matron on duty. "I'm Mr. Ajayi," I said. "My daughter was brought in some hours ago. Olamide." She led me away from the ward into a cubicle, offered me a chair as she opened some drawers. She placed some documents in front of me, asked if I wanted to see the body before signing. Took me a few minutes to realize that by the body, she meant Olamide. I shook my head because I couldn't speak, and started signing the documents. Didn't read a word of the text, simply looked out for the signature boxes on each page and appended my signature. The matron offered her condolences when I got up to leave, assuring me that the doctors had done their best but the baby had been dead on arrival. I shook her hand, said thank you, told her that I appreciated their efforts. Yejide was sitting still as a rock when I got back to the car. I could only tell for sure that she was alive when she blinked. I was supposed to offer words of comfort, tell her something to alleviate her pain. I'd done it before on condolence visits, spoken to colleagues who'd lost spouses or relatives, had found words to tell them everything would somehow still be all right. I jammed the key in the ignition, gripped the steering wheel, and stared through the windscreen at the people walking up and down in the sunny parking lot, as though it was just any other day. I did my best to think of something to say to my wife, even found enough words to string together into a sentence or two. And because I wanted my words to have maximum impact, to give comfort for what I couldn't yet fully comprehend, I turned to look her in the eye. Then, I noticed the breast milk stain on the front of her green blouse. I could tell she wasn't wearing a bra and the stain was right in front of her right nipple. It was a fresh stain, small, about the size of a baby's hand, Olamide's hand. I simply forgot whatever it was I had wanted to say. As I watched the milk stain spread downwards, I realized that the ground under our feet had just been pulled away. We were standing on air, and my words could not keep us from falling into the pit that had opened up beneath us. Chapter 20. Mommy said Olamide was a bad child, an evil girl who had chosen to die. I almost slapped her when she said it. It was her way of comforting me, convincing me that my Olamide wanted to die, that there was nothing any mother could have done. It was not working, and she knew it. I could not stop thinking of my baby. How wicked it was that she was forever trapped in soft yellow, and her skin would never match her ears. I was untouched by the downcast faces of mourners who filled my sitting room. It was their silence that touched me, squeezed my heart. The almost total silence of the mourners, broken only by soft words meant to comfort and encourage. If my Olamide had grown older, if she had married and had children before dying, if it was me or Akin who had died, the mourners would have been wailing openly, not biting their lips and shaking their head and asking me to forget because there would soon be another child. It squeezed me inside that no one wailed or screamed. Everyone was so organized. There was no chaos, no crashing chairs or utensils, nobody rolling on the floor or tearing their hair out. Even Maomi did not dance. No one was lost for words. They all knew what to say. Don't worry, you will soon have another child. There was no framed photograph on a table with a condolence register beneath it. It was as if nobody would miss her. No one was sorry that Olamide had died. They were sorry that I had lost a child, not that she had died. It was as though because she had spent so little time in the world, it did not really matter that she was gone. She did not really matter. One would think we had lost a dog that was dear to our hearts. It squeezed me deep inside to see people so calm, as if nothing much had been lost. And when voices from the too calm stream of consolers told me to imagine how terrible it would have been for this to have happened at a later date, on the eve of her graduation or the eve of her wedding, I wished I could wail, scream, roll on the ground and give her the mourning she deserved. But I could not. A part of me that could do that had gone into the morgue's freezer with Olamide to keep her company and to beg her forgiveness for all the signs I had missed. The funeral took place within 5 days. Akin and I were not allowed to attend, and we would never know the burial spot. My mother-in-law kept reminding me that I should not pester anyone about the spot that had been chosen. She whispered into my ears that I must never see her grave because then my eyes would have seen evil. Then I would have experienced the worst thing that could happen to a parent, which was to know a child's burial place. I did not respond to my mother-in-law's words. I lay on the sitting-room couch through the morning, holding myself perfectly still, waiting for the moment they would place her little coffin in the ground. I was sure that if I lay still enough, I would know. I lay motionless and watched the clock until it became blurry. Time passed in a haze. I vaguely remember Akin picking up his car keys and saying something to me at some point. I stayed on the couch until I realized the time was 2 o'clock. The interment would have been over by 12 noon. I had felt nothing all day. As still as I had not been vigilant enough. I screamed then, a short piercing sound that left me coughing, a sound I could not sustain as much as I wanted to. Even then there were no tears, not a single drop. Mongomi was by my side instantly, tracing her finger across my scalp. Before you know it, you'll be pregnant again. You will recover, you'll see, she said, as though I had a cold and only needed to rest a little so that I could get better. I wished she were dead instead of my child. I turned away from her and did not tell her that I was already pregnant. Walls of pain closed in on me from every side. I tried to push, but the walls were concrete and steel. I was mere flesh and miserable bones. Akin hinted, advised, cajoled, and finally insisted that I go back to putting in full hours at the salon. I had not told him yet that I was pregnant. I actually never told him. When my stomach became too big to ignore, he leaned against the kitchen door's frame and asked me, "Are you pregnant?" I picked up a knife from the plate rack. "Again?" Akin added, as though he was just remembering that I had been pregnant before. I cut through the water leaves, gripped the knife too tightly, and exerted every muscle in my arm as if I were cutting a tuber of yam. "Yejide." I stabbed the knife into the wooden chopping board and turned to face this man, who was my husband. I clasped my hands over my protruding belly. "What do you think, Akin? Tell me, what do you think is in my stomach?" "Why don't you just answer my question?" "You think I have strapped a calabash to my stomach? You? This man? Is that what you are thinking?" He scratched his eyebrows and looked away, fixing his gaze on some point above my head. I turned my back to him. He cleared his throat. "So, you are pregnant?" It was still a question. The man thought that my head had scattered to the point where I would strap a calabash to my stomach. That was why he was still asking a question. He could not believe. The weather was hot, and the only thing I was wearing was a big t-shirt that stopped mid-thigh. Did he want to inspect my stomach? Maybe cut through the skin a little just to be sure? I prized the knife from the chopping board and let my hands fall to my side. I nodded. "Yes." He made a sound that I could not quite make out. It sounded like congratulations. It sounded like he was choking, or holding back a sob. I stared out of the kitchen window, the knife steel cold against my bare thigh. "I'm sorry," he said after a while. "About the baby's death." "Her name is Olamide!" I screamed. I turned to face him, the other 20 names we had given my daughter ready to roll off my tongue. The doorway was empty. He was already gone. On my first day back at work, I asked one of the girls to cut my hair. She refused, glaring at me as though I had asked her to chop my head off. All the girls refused to touch the scissors. Even Iabolu refused. "But you are pregnant again," she said. I cut the tresses myself and left the rest of my hair in low, uneven chunks. The customers looked horrified. If it had been Akin who had died, they would not have been so shocked to see my hair chopped off. Why then were they staring as though I had lost my mind? My car had been taken for servicing that day, so I dragged myself home after I closed the salon. My feet felt like lead. I did not want to go home to the empty cot that was still beside the bed I shared with Akin. Akin was home when I got there. He was working at the dining table. He had dozens of white sheets spread out and was punching numbers into a calculator. "What happened to your hair?" he asked, pushing the calculator away. "A bird chewed it off my head on my way home. What else could have happened?" He went back to punching in his numbers. I sat in an armchair with my back to the dining table. "How low do you want it cut?" Akin asked. "Skin cut," I said, trying to work out candle wax from the rug with my big toe. There were several stains on it. It had not been swept in weeks. Suddenly, I felt Akin's hand on my head. He ran his hands through my shaggy hair. Then, I heard the sharp snips of a pair of scissors. Tufts of hair fell across my face, sticking to my skin when they met with the tears falling silently down my cheeks. The tufts prickled my skin, but I did not pull them off my face. I would let them stay all night. Let my skin itch and itch until my face felt as if I had scrubbed it with a piece of raw yam. "Go and shower," he said when he was through. I couldn't stand up. Sobs tightened my chest, making it hard for me to breathe. Akin knelt beside me and laid his head on my stomach, one hand clutching my dress, the other hanging limply over the edge of the armchair, still holding the scissors. He would never admit it, but I felt his tears that day. They plastered my dress to my belly and validated my grief. I threw my head back, and I wept out loud. I cursed, I screamed, I cried, I apologized to my daughter, begged her to forgive my carelessness, pleaded with her to listen to me wherever she was. I cried throughout the night as hard as I could. I held my head and tried to cry out the pain. The next night, I slept straight through. I did not dream of dead babies decomposing under the ground. I did not dream at all. For about 6 hours after I woke up, I thought my tears had washed my pain and guilt away. I did not know then that that was impossible. Chapter 21. Chesson was born on a Wednesday. I was at work when my waters broke, and it was Iabolu who drove me to the hospital. Her husband had just bought a new second-hand car, and she had finally inherited his old Mazda, and was learning to drive. Her driving experience had been limited to driving from the salon to her house and back, but she refused to put the red L sign in front of her number plates, or anywhere on the car. I sat in the front seat and tried to give her driving tips in between contractions. I could have taken a taxi, but I let her drive me to the hospital, perhaps because on some level I believed I deserved some punishment for what had happened to my daughter. There were few people at Chesson's naming ceremony. It was a small gathering that took place in our sitting room. Guests sat on dining chairs we had borrowed from our neighbours, ate jollof rice, and went home an hour after the ceremony. Momi did not even come. Her daughter, Amiola, who now lived in Enugu, had also had a baby around that time, and Momi left for Enugu about a week before I gave birth to Chesson. No one travelled down from Lagos or Ife. There was no live band, no tarpaulin tent outside, no microphone, no DJ. There was no dancing. Chesson's middle name was Ige, because he came feet first into this world. Those feet were good feet. There was no doubt in anyone's mind after a few weeks that my son's feet were as good as feet could get. Like all people with good feet, his arrival in our family was followed by all sorts of good things happening to us. For instance, Akin bought 4 plots of land for half the market value because the owner was swarming in debt and had to sell all his assets. That was not such a good thing for the poor man, but as with many things in life, sometimes one person's good fortune is a direct consequence of another person's ruin. I was vigilant with Chesson. Akin thought I was becoming paranoid. He warned me that my son would grow up and never be able to marry because he would be over-attached to me. And I wondered how on earth Chesson could be over-attached to me when his life depended on him attaching his mouth to my breast. The way I saw it, the danger was in a child being under-attached, or not attached at all. I was fully prepared to padlock Chesson's wrist to my apron strings and drag him around for the rest of my life. Chesson was a peaceful child. He cried only when he needed to eat, and even then his cries were punctuated by polite pauses. Sometimes I would check on him in the middle of the night to find him wide awake in his cot, chortling with his hands and legs in the air, enjoying his own company, not demanding attention. We bought a house on Imo Street, not far from the estate where we lived. It did not have a fence when we bought it, but we had one built before we moved in. It was higher than the roof and had rolls of barbed wire at the top. Armed robberies had become common across the country, and fences were springing up all over town, some of them taller than the one that kept convicts in at the prison. Most neighbourhoods now employed at least one vigilante to walk the streets during the night, firing a shot from time to reassure residents. During the day, burglars snuck into homes and took all they could before their victims returned. I began to leave the radio on whenever we were leaving home, in order to give any would-be burglar the impression that there were people in the house. I observed that most people did the same, and in many homes radios droned on non-stop until the station shut down for the day. Before our new house stopped smelling of paint, the salon graduated from a 5-dryer salon to a 10-dryer salon. After a short while, Akin and I saved enough money and bought the 2-story building housing my salon. Even though Chesson brought us so much good fortune, It was Olamide that I thought about at night before I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up in the mornings, before I opened my eyes, I could see her, alive and looking into my eyes while she suckled, like someone who had known me before time. Chapter 22. Shortly after we moved into our new home, Dotun lost his job in Lagos and moved in with us. He never really moved in the sense that a married man with 4 children never moves in with another family, except when he's leaving his wife. He just showed up one day and did not go back to Lagos. He claimed that he needed time to sort out himself so that he could get another job. The truth was that he had lost his job a year before coming to us and spent his savings on setting up a bakery that failed within a few months. He tried to get another job after that, but the only openings he could find were for security guards or messengers, positions he did not take because with his MBA, he felt overqualified. After walking the soles of his last pair of shoes off in Lagos, he sold his car, his wife's car, borrowed some money and tried to resuscitate the bakery business. This time he was duped by some fraudsters in circumstances he claimed were too embarrassing to share. He told me all this first, before telling Akin. He came to Ilesha to hide from his creditors, and even when Akin gave him part of our savings to pay off his creditors, he did not leave. During the first few weeks of his stay with us, Dotun must have had at least 3 cartons of the locally brewed trophy lager. He did very little other than eat meat out of my pot of stew and proclaim out of the blue how sexy I was as I tried to fix dinner before my husband returned from work. He sang my praises every day, wearing at my patience, chipping away my defenses until I realized what I thought was steel was actually plywood. If he had said I was beautiful, I would have resisted him. Akin said that all the time, with a tinge of awe that never went out of his voice as the years went by. Dotun, on the other hand, praised the perfect mound of my breast, the roundness of my buttocks, and the seductiveness of my eyes. "I love it when you burn this stew," he said one day, eyeing me over a bottle of beer. I was coming out of the kitchen. I had just incinerated a pot of vegetable stew that I was making to go with Akin's rice that night. Dotun placed the bottle by his feet. "Especially when you are upstairs when it happens. You run downstairs, and when you run, your breasts jiggle. And I keep thinking about you. That weekend I stopped over on my way to Abuja." I did not like to think about that weekend. It was about 2 months after Olamide had been born, and Akin had to go on an emergency business trip to Lagos after his brother arrived. Dotun and I were home alone with Olamide the entire weekend. The house was not big enough to keep us from running into each other. We were having breakfast on Saturday when he reached across to push hair out of my face. Then he touched my ear and did not let go. It was not quick and furtive like the first time. He did not finish too soon. I felt guilty enough to stay away from him for the rest of the weekend, and I promised myself that it would never happen again. "I always think about that weekend," Dotun said. My heart was beating faster as he spoke, and I could feel my nipples tighten. I was grateful for the good things in life, such as the padded bra I was wearing that day. "Look, it's not happening again." "Don't fight it," he said. "It's normal for you to want it." I inched away, though I knew Dotun would never try to touch me. I would have to go to him. He would never seek me out. "What are you talking about?" "Let me know when you are ready." "I'm always ready," he said, and picked up his beer again. I told myself that it was the drink that made him so bold. He was partially drunk. His words were slurred. It was good for me that he said it this way, as though getting into bed with him was just a business transaction. It helped me put things in perspective, and doused the fire that was smouldering in the pit of my belly, and stemmed the wetness gathering between my legs. I should have told him to stop speaking to me that way, to stop pointing out that my breasts were still remarkably firm after nursing 2 children. He would have stopped. At least he would have if I'd threatened to tell Akin. But I did not want him to stop. I loved the way his words coursed into my ear, spreading warmth everywhere in my body. Instead of reporting the lewd remarks to Akin and demanding that Dotun be evicted from our home, I pretended to ignore them. At night, I played the words over in my mind, complete with the husky tone with which he said them, while Akin lay on his stomach beside me, snoring with his mouth open. I began to have reasons to head back home after dropping Chesson off at school. My head felt heavy. The weight doubled with each step I took towards Dotun's room, the room that once belonged to the child I did not give birth to, before it was passed on to Funmi. Dotun was sitting on the floor with his back to the door when I entered the room, writing an application letter. There were a dozen envelopes strewn across the floor. Most were sealed and addressed. I did not know until then that he was making an effort to get work. I assumed that he drank beer and ate meat out of my pot all day. Akin had told me Dotun was staying just long enough to sort himself out. I wondered why he talked to Akin about his grand schemes instead of the applications he seemed to write every day. I wanted to back out of the room. It felt as though I had stumbled on him doing something private, and if I watched, I would be drawn into some form of intimacy with him. He looked up. No backing out for me now. He swept the envelopes into a pile, but his gaze stayed on my face.
"What is the matter? C'è così?"
he asked. Nothing, well, nothing. He stood up.
"There's nothing wrong. You're in my room."
I came here to... How are the applications going? Has anybody answered you yet? He sat on the bed and held his head in his hands, staring at the pile of envelopes. He was quiet. It was my cue to take off my blouse or do whatever one did to say, "I'm ready to have sex with you again." I felt stupid. Why had I come in? What did I know about seducing a man, even a willing one? I had been a virgin when I married Akin.
"I was roped into a fraud at work. That's why I got sacked. Word gets around about these things, no one will employ me now. Nobody."
He spoke in a rush as though the words were burning his tongue. I wished he had remained alone in his tortured world and said nothing. I did not want to know his secret pain or agony. I did not care and did not want to. I wanted just one thing from him.
"I didn't tell brother Me. Don't tell him, please, don't,"
he said. I nodded.
"I was not involved in the fraud. I was just stupid enough to authorize some of the documents involved. It was a woman that actually did it. I was sleeping with her."
He looked up. His eyes were bleak and beseeching. I nodded. Of course he was sleeping with a girl in his office. According to his wife, he was sleeping with every woman on their street. He sighed.
"My wife, she doesn't believe me. Thinks I have money stashed somewhere, some pretty girl waiting to spend it with me."
He laughed.
"I wish. Don't tell Bros Akin. Please, don't. Maybe I should tell him every—"
He lay back on the bed and covered his face with his hands.
"I'm done for. I can't run a business. Nobody will employ me. I'm finished."
"It will be okay," I said, hoping he would shut up, hoping I could leave the room before he bared more of his soul to me. I sat beside him on the bed. "You graduated with a first-class degree. You'll figure something out." The laughter stopped. His heavy breathing punctuated the silence. "Thank you," he said. My legs trembled as I left the room. Chesson and I were about to leave the house for a communion service when I learnt about the Orca coup. Though he had only just started walking, Chesson was firm on his feet and insisted on descending the stairs without my assistance. It was while I trailed him down the stairs that I heard the coup broadcast on the radio we now left on at all hours. Once it registered that the voice on the radio was announcing the overthrow of Babangida's regime, I carried my son, shushed him when he protested, and rushed into the sitting room. It wasn't 8 a.m. yet. Akin was sleeping in upstairs, and Dotun was in his room, probably hungover. So I was alone with Chesson while I listened to what was a repeat broadcast of the takeover speech. I nodded as the speaker reeled out accusations against Babangida's government. But when he announced the expulsion of 5 northern states from the country, I was so shocked I decided to wait for the broadcast to be repeated again, just to be sure I'd heard him right. I loosened my headscarf while the station played martial music. There was no point going to church now. There was a power cut before I'd finished folding the scarf. I sighed. It could be hours or days before electricity was restored. There was no predicting it anymore. I took Chesson upstairs and tried to remove his bow tie. He was wailing his disagreement when Akin woke up.
What's the matter with him?
I released Chesson, and he ran off to stand by Akin's side of the bed.
Aren't you going to church?
Akin said, squinting at the wall clock.
It's already nearly 9.
They've toppled Babangida, I said. There's been a coup. Akin shot up in bed. Seriously? I listened to the broadcast before the lights went out.
I told Dotun someone would take this man down. That Dele Giwa matter was too fishy.
He swung his feet to the floor.
Nobody can prove it was him, but still. And didn't he promise there would be elections this year? And we would go back to a democracy. Where is the democracy now?
That's part of what these new ones are saying. That he would have made himself life president if they didn't take over.
Not possible in this Nigeria.
Akin stood up, and Chesson hugged one of his legs.
This is not some banana republic.
There was one strange thing they said, though. I went over to Akin's side and grabbed Chesson's hand. He snivelled while I unbuttoned his shirt. They said they are expelling some northern states from the Federation. Sokoto, Borno, Kano. I can't remember the others, but there were more.
They are doing what?
I don't even understand that part. It's not possible, is it? The phone rang, and we both jumped. We knew the pattern. Once a coup took place, the lines would usually be down all day. Akin picked up the phone. I listened to his side of the conversation and deciphered that his sister was on the other end of the line. They spoke for a while, and Akin assured her that he didn't think there was any trouble in town and we were all fine. Almost immediately, after he returned the phone to its cradle, it rang again. This time, it was Ajoke, Dotun's wife.
She wants us to pray,
Akin said, after he got off the phone with Ajoke.
There's a face-off going on in Lagos. They can hear gunshots in their house.
Oh my God, her children! Are they okay?
Yes, but she is afraid. The gunshots are loud.
Hakim pressed a palm against his forehead.
I think they'll be fine, though. There won't be civilian casualties.
I sat on the bed, imagining Ajoke and her children huddled in the corner of a room. God help them.
If they are still fighting now, I don't think Babangida is going anywhere.
You should tell Dotun that Ajoke called.
Yes, yes.
He lifted Chesson and piggybacked him out of the room. There's breakfast in the kitchen, I called after him. I made moi moi. I stayed in the room, worrying what the next few days would be like. The more I thought about it, the more I hoped Babangida would manage to hold on to power, not because I liked the way he was running the country, but because the status quo was the devil we knew. If the new officers took over and really expelled the northern states, the situation would probably devolve into another civil war within a few weeks. Akin yelled something, and I went out to the landing. What did you say?
Dotun thinks he brought his transistor radio,
he said.
He's looking for it in his room.
Akin was standing in the middle of the sitting room. Chesson was now sitting on his shoulders, stretching to touch the ceiling. I went downstairs. Since it was Dotun, it took forever for him to locate the radio and the right-sized batteries. When he finally switched it on, all the stations were playing instrumental pieces, signalling that things were still in a confused state, and none of them was confident enough to return to regular programming. Dotun settled for a station that was playing what sounded like classical music. We sat unspeaking, surrounded by the sound of music, waiting for news. Suddenly, the radio went silent, and for a moment I thought the batteries were flat. But it soon crackled with static, and a voice spoke to us.
I, Lieutenant Colonel Gandhi Tola Zido, hereby assure you that the dissidents have been routed. You are all advised to remain calm and await further announcements. Thank you.
Dotun got on the phone and spoke to Ajoke and the children. Then we all continued to listen to the radio until the batteries ran out. There were more announcements, speeches and broadcasts which told us that yes, there had been bloodshed, but nothing had changed after all. Iyabolu was now my tenant. She held on to her salon after I bought the building, and her husband paid the rent on the first day of every month. She had hardly any customers, so there was no way she could have afforded the rent without her husband's help. Yet she refused to close down the salon.
I cannot just be sitting down at home,
she would say any time I suggested that she should let the salon go.
Let me be waking up and coming here until I know of another job I can do.
She continued to spend most of her time in my salon, and I began to stop customers from sitting in the chair I came to think of as Iyabolu's chair. When her daughters returned from school in the afternoons, they ate lunch in her salon and did their homework there. If the girls wandered over into my shop, she shooed them away with the same words every time.
Go and read your books. That Bolu is going to be a doctor by God's grace,
Iyabolu would say, after the children had grumbled their way into the corridor. Usually my customers would say, Amen, as Bolu and her siblings disappeared down the corridor. But one day, one of my regulars, Auntie Sadia, was in the salon when Iyabolu made her declaration. Instead of saying Amen, Auntie Sadia laughed.
Why are you laughing?
Iyabolu said, standing up.
What is funny?
I was removing Auntie Sadia's weave, using a blade to sever the thread that held the attachments to her hair. She looked into the mirror as she replied to Iyabolu. That your yellow-skinned daughter. Don't you see? She is already becoming beautiful. You think the boys will let her rest? She said the word beautiful, as if beauty was a bad habit Bolu had developed, something bordering on criminal behavior, for which she would one day be justifiably punished. Iyabolu came to stand beside me, arms akimbo.
So if Bolu is beautiful, she cannot read, she cannot go to university?
Auntie Sadia smiled into the mirror. Just wait until her breasts are sweet oranges, and all the men that see her start standing stiff like soldiers. Small time, pregnancy will come. Then you will understand what I'm saying.
Not my daughter, God forbid.
Iyabolu leaned closer to Auntie Sadia and raised her voice.
My own daughter will go to school.
I stared at Auntie Sadia, waiting for her to apologize or say something to pacify Iyabolu. She did not speak. There's nothing stopping a beautiful girl from facing her books, Auntie, I said finally, patting Iyabolu on the shoulders. I was done removing Auntie Sadia's weave, so I motioned a stylist to loosen her cornrows. I went to the corner of the salon, where Chesson was asleep in his cot, and held his wrist for a few moments, feeling the reassuring rhythm of his pulse. I'm just saying that the hard thing is sweet, Abi. Even you, her mother, if it was not sweet, would you have given birth to her? Auntie Sadia had turned in her seat and was smiling at Iyabolu. It was the closest thing to an apology that she would offer. Iyabolu shook her head.
My own daughter is going to be a doctor. After that, she can enjoy all the hard things she wants.
Okay, then she will be a doctor before the stiff soldiers get her.
Not that the world will end if they get her first, and then she becomes a doctor.
Auntie Sadia laughed and slapped Iabolu's hand.
At least, we thank God he doesn't kill people.
Iabolu joined in the laughter.
Some of us would be dead if it killed. We thank God the pestle doesn't kill the mortar. If it did, how would we be able to enjoy wonderful pounded yam? But this God is a great God, though. Iabolu, you know when that thing is asleep, just soft like that, you can't disrespect it anyhow. But once it stands like this,
Auntie Sadia got up and stood at attention.
Hard like that. I just want to thank the God that made it that way.
Iabolu clapped.
It is that hardness that gives it value and honor, Ojare.
Abi! Auntie Sadia sat down.
What do we want to do with a soft pestle? Can it pound yam?
As they talked, I became uncomfortable. I thought about the last time Aking and I had made love, and I wanted to ask Auntie Sadia questions. She seemed like the kind of person who would slap the back of my hand and give straightforward answers. But I bit my tongue, because I was not the kind of woman who discussed her sex life with women in a salon. The stylist was now done with Auntie Sadia. I went to her and stuck a comb in her hair. "So, which style do you want?" I asked.
Madame, why is your face hard like this? Abi, you don't eat midnight pounded yam?
Don't mind her. That is how she will be frowning as if she's a virgin. Iabolu pointed at Cheson's cot.
But we have evidence that she can do very well.
Madame, which style do you want? Auntie Sadia stared at me for a while, a smile still playing at the corner of her lips. I felt nervous beneath her gaze and was worried that she would keep talking about sex.
"Okay," she said. "Just weaving, all back. Weave all back."
I began to rub pomade into her hair, grateful that she had dropped the subject. I pushed the questions I wanted to ask away and let her soft tresses slide through my fingers. She smiled into the mirror as I sectioned the hair.
"I know your type. You will do your face as if you are merry. But once the bedroom door is shut like this, you fire."
I bit my lower lip and said nothing.